I want you to imagine that you're in an extremely lucky position, that you're far away from civilization, staring up at an amazing starscape in the night sky. Here's an amazing fact. Even with the naked eye, in this position, you can see stars which are 16,308 light years away. What that means is that you can see stars, the light from which has taken 16,308 years to reach your eyes. And we can use that amazing fact to illustrate a fundamental puzzle in the philosophy of perception. So here you are, looking up into the night sky, and you see a particular star. And let's say the star you focus on is one of these very distant stars, 16,000 light years away, and so such that the light that hits your eyes is 16,000 years old. Well, that means that 8,000 years ago, at the very dawn of civilization, that light was only halfway along its journey between the star and you. And let's further imagine that 8,000 years ago, this star is destroyed. Fast forward 8,000 years, and here you are. We want to say that you see a star, but given the case, we now know that there is no star for you to see. That star was obliterated at the very dawn of civilization. One thing we're going to be tempted to say about this case is that you're not really seeing a star at all. After all, there is no star for you to see. What I want you to note is that that is an uncomfortable or counterintuitive thing for us to say, even in spite of the facts that I've presented to you. The reason why it's so counterintuitive is because it's so intuitive to talk as if seeing is a genuine contact between you and the objects around you. As philosophers sometimes put it, intuitively, when you look at an object, when you see a tree or see your computer in front of you, that computer or that tree is genuinely an aspect or a part of the experience you have itself. But of course, if the tree or the computer is an aspect of your experience, you just couldn't be having that same experience if there were no tree or computer around. They're parts of that experience. If they don't exist, the experience can't exist either. So now one thing we might want to say is that the star case is somehow peripheral. Okay, this is a very strange and unusual example. Most of the things we see are around at the time when we see them. But let me bring your attention to a couple more examples where it looks like this common sense intuition of ours is going to get eaten away at. Here's the checker shadow illusion. So this is an illustration of a checkerboard with a spherical object casting a shadow across it. Now I want you to focus on the squares labelled A and B. Now, most people, in fact almost everyone, when they look at these two squares, will see them as being very different in colour. I cannot help but see B as being much lighter in colour than A, much more like the squares adjacent to A, in fact. However, this is an illusion, and we can see that it's an illusion by putting up these bars. Now you can see when you look at the bars that they are uniform in colour, and when you hold them up to A, you see that A is the same colour as the bars. But now look at B, and you can see that B is also the same colour as the bars, and that means that A and B must be the same in colour. But remember, when you look at them, you just can't help but see them as being different. We have here a classic visual illusion. And what the illusion is showing us is that it seems to us as if something is the case, even though that thing is not the case at all. Okay, we seem to be seeing these squares which are different in colour, even when the squares we're looking at are in fact the same in colour. Here's another illusion, what I'm going to call the rolling ball illusion. So when you look closely at this picture, most of you, like me, will see a rotation. It feels as if there is a rotation round the red ball, and to some of you it may seem as if the red ball is rotating in the opposite direction. But this is a still image. There is in fact no rotation out there in the world. So where does all of this leave us? Well, we've got three different cases, in each of which you see something, or you want to say that you see something, but where the thing that you want to say that you see is not actually out there in external reality. There is no star. These squares are not the same in colour, and there is in fact no rotation. Now, philosophers have used cases like this to argue for an incredibly radical, very counterintuitive, and to my mind, incredibly implausible conclusion. And the conclusion that philosophers have drawn from these cases is that, in fact, you never really see external things. So what we need to do is to understand how philosophers have used the cases that we've just been looking at to get to this unusual conclusion. Well, first, take what we seem to be able to say about what our cases have in common. In each of those cases, what you see is not what's really out there in the world. So, you see a star, but there is no star for you to see. You see different coloured squares, but there are no differently coloured squares for you to see. You see rotation or movement in the image, but in fact there is no rotation or movement in the image that you're looking at. So that seems a good place to start. The thought is then that if what you see isn't something that's really out there in the world, it must be something that's internal to you. In the cases we're looking at, the thought goes, what you see must be somewhere else. It's not out there in external reality, so it must be in your internal reality, your mental life. It must be what philosophers sometimes call sense data, something that's between you and the world around you. The thought is this: look, you see something. You see the star, you see the squares of different colours, you see the rotation in the image. But what you see, as we know, in these cases is not an aspect of the reality around you. So, what you see, the thought goes, must be something internal to you. Now these look like two very helpful steps on the way to this crazy conclusion. What I want you to think about is what other steps we're going to need. And this might be a good time to just pause the video and think, what's missing here to get us to the conclusion? Well, the problem for the argument is that those first two moves just talk about the problematic cases we've been thinking about. Cases where how things appear is not how things really are. What we need is some way of spreading our thoughts about these cases to all cases. And the thought is going to be this, that the nature of our experiences is the same in these problematic cases as it is in standard knowledge-securing situations. Standard situations like the situation of you're seeing your computer or seeing a tree through the window. And I want you to reflect on the fact that this is very intuitive. For intuitively, experiences are the kinds of things that wear their hearts on their sleeves. When you reflect on experiences, you might think, there's really nothing that those experiences could hide about their nature. So, if we have come to the conclusion that experiences in the problematic cases are experiences of something inner or mental, not really external things, and to the extent that those experiences feel just the same as experiences where things have gone right, where we really have got somehow in touch with the way things really are, then, with this intuition in mind, it looks like we have to conclude that experiences always just get us to something inner or mental. And then we can get our conclusion, the conclusion that we're not really seeing any external things ever. We're only ever seeing things which are internal or mental. So where does that leave us? Well, some philosophers are prepared to accept this very strange and counterintuitive thought. But to many philosophers, this has seemed more of an invitation to find something wrong in the reasoning that led us there. So, how should we respond to this puzzle? Well, if we've got an argument which is pushing us in the direction of a conclusion that seems wrong, the only way to stop ourselves from having to accept that conclusion is to find something wrong in the argument. I'm going to present two things which one might question about how this argument works, and it would be really interesting for you to think about whether there are any other ways in which this argument can be undermined. The first thing we might think is that we could reject this extra move that we needed, this move that spread our thoughts about the problematic cases to all cases of seeing. The disjunctivist, as a theorist, is someone who thinks that when things go right, so in standard knowledge-securing cases of seeing, you really are in genuine contact with objects in the world. They really are aspects or parts of your experience. Now, that can't always be the case because we've seen these problematic cases where there just are no things out there in the world that could be the parts that fit into your experience. So this is a disjunctivist view in the sense that it holds that experiences are disjoined. There are experiences of completely different kinds, some of which relate you to objects out there in the world, and some of which only relate you to things which are internal or mental. What that requires is for us to give up that second intuition that we noted earlier. It requires us to give up the idea that experience wears its heart on its sleeve, that Merely by reflecting on the nature of experience, we can understand what experiences really are. Here's another way that we could try to worm our way out of having to accept this strange conclusion. Philosophers often question the move from our first step to our second step. Remember that the first step says that in some cases, what you see is not what's really out there. And the second step moves from that claim to the thought that there must be something that you see, and that thing that you see must be internal. Well, reflect on an analogy. Think about your beliefs. Think about your thinking rather than your seeing. Just because you can think about unicorns, or think about Luke Skywalker, or think that there's a planet between Mercury and the Sun, it doesn't follow that there really are unicorns, or that Luke Skywalker really exists, or that indeed there is such a planet as Vulcan between Mercury and the Sun. Thinking has what philosophers call intentionality. Thinking is about things, but it's not always the case that there are things which it's about. So if we thought that seeing was a little bit like thinking, that seeing was intentional in that way, then we could deny this move from the first step to the second step. We could say that in some cases, what you see is not what's really out there, but deny that that means that there is something you see and that that thing isn't out there, isn't external to you. Now I want you to note that both of these potential solutions have us giving up one of our intuitions. The disjunctivist accepts the intuition that in normal cases we're in direct contact in seeing with some objects and features in our environment, that those objects and features really are parts or aspects of our experience. And it accepts that at the expense of the intuition that we can really understand the nature of experience merely by reflecting on experience. Because it implies that experiences that seem exactly the same from the inside might be fundamentally different in kind from each other. The intentionalist accepts that intuition about what reflection can do. It accepts that experiences wear their hearts on their sleeves. But the intentionalist has to deny our starting intuition, has to deny that experience really is a matter of being in genuine contact with objects or features in your environment. This is a position we often find ourselves in philosophy. Our intuitive ways of understanding how things work turn out to be inconsistent. They involve us believing two things which can't both be true at the same time. We can't both think that experience is a matter of genuine contact and think that we can understand experience from the inside, that we have self-knowledge of the natures of our experiences. The real nitty-gritty of philosophy comes when we try to work out what to do. Which of these intuitions should we give up, and why should we give up the one rather than the other? What benefit is it to us to accept our intuition about self-knowledge, and is that benefit outweighed by the benefits of taking ourselves, sometimes at least, to be in direct and genuine contact with the objects that we think we can see? I will leave you to think about those difficult and deep problems, and I look forward to welcoming you to Southampton. I'm Will McNeill. Thank you very much. Please do feel free to email me or to email any of the team here at Southampton or learn more about the philosophy department by looking us up on the website, finding our Twitter feed, finding us on Facebook, and please do get in contact with me or any of my colleagues for any more questions.